Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Cutting Through, where we present analysis of foreign policy and domestic politics that cuts through the noise of corporate and ideologically driven media. I'm Mitchell Plitnick, the president of Rethinking Foreign Policy and the author of the Cutting Through newsletter on Substack. You can support my work and this video and the upcoming wonderful interviews and guests that we're going to be having. If you go to mitchellplitnick.substack.com and go to the Cutting Through newsletter, you can see where you can subscribe and you can become a paid subscriber and support this work. If you can't do that, you can become a free subscriber and just help me circulate this far and wide. Anything you can do will be helpful. Well, it's Tuesday, August 6th, and it's a pretty big day for Israel-Palestine politics in the United States. By the time this video gets out there, most of you will probably already know the result of the Missouri Democratic primary, where Cori Bush is trying to stave off millions of AIPAC dollars that have been mobilized against her. We've already seen one member of the so-called squad ousted in a tough race in New York, Representative Jamal Bowman. And AIPAC has also decided that they're going after Cori Bush in this cycle. And that race looks a lot closer. So it's very hard to tell right now who's going to win. But again, by the time you see this, you'll probably know. And well, I'll certainly have more to say once those results are in. But the first part of today was about Kamala Harris and her decision about her running mate. I have to say, I was very, very relieved and a little bit surprised that she chose Minnesota Governor Tim Walz over Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. Over the past few days, I'd been getting more and more of a sense that Walz was going to be the choice. But since Shapiro was seen as the conventional pick, I was still worried that Harris might go with him. Fortunately, she didn't. Shapiro was a bad pick. Okay. I mean, he was the wrong pick on many, many levels. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is. But first, I mean, we need to deal with some of the really bad faith response to Harris's choice that have come with people accusing Harris of not choosing Josh Shapiro because he's Jewish. There's no legitimate basis for this criticism. In fact, it's insane. Kamala Harris has a Jewish husband, Jewish stepchildren. She is certainly, without question, a pro-Israel figure for whatever that's worth. But she's been connected to the Jewish community through her husband, Douglas Emhoff. And that's not ever been a secret. It's always been something that Harris has been clear about, and that has been part of who she has been politically. The idea that she would reject somebody out of hand because they're Jewish is insane. And it's as insane as it would be for her to reject marrying someone because they're Jewish, because we have seen she will not do that. The notion that Shapiro was rejected because solely of his pro-Israel stance is also not correct, although that was certainly part of it. I think the way it's not that, Harris is pro-Israel, Tim Walz is pro-Israel, Josh Shapiro is pro-Israel. And although some people have said that their actual political stances are indistinguishable, is usually the word I've seen used, it's not exactly true. Okay, Shapiro does have a somewhat more, shall we say, radically pro-Israel past. I think he has certainly gone to great lengths in the past few weeks to make it clear that he doesn't necessarily hold all the beliefs he did in his youth. And that's fair, by the way. I actually, some of the criticism that has been leveled at him, while it certainly is not anti-Semitic, I do think can be called irrelevant. When we look back at things he wrote when he was 20 years old in college, I mean, I think most of us, once we get into our 40s and 50s and beyond, we'll look back at things we did, said, wrote in college that we're not proud of, that we don't, or maybe we're proud of it in the sense that we like that we stood up for a certain belief back then, but we don't believe that anymore. I would think people grow, and I will give people a chance to do that. So I don't hold what he wrote when he was 20, that strongly against him. But it is disturbing that that is a place that he was ever at. I mean, what he basically wrote that you can't make peace with Palestinians because they are too battle-minded. It's a classic Islamophobic trope. It's very racist. And that's who he was when he was 20. But I'm prepared to believe that that's not who he is now. And fine, if that's the case. Although, I think he could have gone a little farther in convincing people that that's really not who he is now. But that's what he says, and you can either be convinced of it or not. But I don't actually think that any of that is really the issue. I think what's more of an issue is how he's dealt with recent events. He has pressured state employees to avoid supporting Palestinians publicly while they're being slaughtered, while there is a genocide going on in Gaza. He has compared people protesting that genocide to the Ku Klux Klan. This is not when he was 20. This is in the past few months when he was governor of Pennsylvania. That is, I think, much more of a concern. And yeah, I do think that picking him would have sent the wrong message to the voters that Kamala Harris has won back in some measure, and not entirely certainly, but has won back in some measure by replacing Joe Biden, who many people just could not bring themselves to vote for, even if they recognize that Trump is worse, which yes, he is. But there's other issues with Shapiro. Shapiro is also pro-fracking. He is on the wrong side of a number of environmental issues. And that is going to be a very, very big deal with, again, the youth vote. We all know this. This is not, you don't have to have a PhD in political science to understand that young voters drive turnout. That's where the question of turnout lies for Democrats. If you mobilize the young voters, that tips the scales in elections towards Democrats. If they don't come out to vote, then you have a big problem. And that is very often why Republicans win. It's not because those young voters are going to go vote for Donald Trump or whoever the local Republicans, it's because they won't vote. And it's not just about Palestine. It's very much also about the environment. That is a big problem with Josh Shapiro. He also is accused of covering up a sexual harassment scandal. He supports school vouchers. He supports cutting corporate taxes. He would have been a terrible choice. He would have alienated many voters. Now, Tim Walz, the only controversy around him, the only thing that makes him, that is a negative among Democrats with him is that he's not Shapiro. That's the only thing people are complaining about. He's not Shapiro. He's not Jewish. Okay, he's not Jewish. If you're pro-Israel, and that's what your concern is, you shouldn't have much to worry about with Tim Walz. He is pro-Israel. I don't think there's any way around that, again, unless you define pro-Israel as being, someone who thinks Bezalel Smotrich is cool, or somebody who thinks that Benjamin Netanyahu is on the right track. If you're one of those people that stood up and applauded Netanyahu in Congress, and that's how you define pro-Israel, then yes, that's not any of these people. I would say that's probably not even Shapiro at this point. It's not Chuck Schumer. It's not. It's not certainly not Kamala Harris. So the accusations around this pick are really bad faith accusations, more so than usual. The idea that in any way Shapiro was rejected because he was Jewish is just not true. He was rejected because on many, many levels he would alienate voters. And again, I think it bears repeating. He would have alienated Palestine solidarity activists, but not because he's pro-Israel. Unless you're completely unrealistic, that whoever Harris picks, everyone talked about for this role is pro-Israel, whether it's Mark Kelly, whether it's J.B. Pritzker, whether it's Andy Beshear, they're Democrats, they're pro-Israel. That is just, there's no way anybody's going to be in the vice president discussion right now. And I'll get to how this maybe can change, but there's no way that anybody can be in this vice presidential discussion right now and not be pro-Israel. So the issue As far as that one point against Shapiro, and again, it's one of many points, but the issue with that one point is the way he was pro-Israel and how he went out of his way to alienate Palestine solidarity activists. That was a problem, and it should be a problem. And if you're, and I think Kamala Harris really showed some good judgment in recognizing that was a problem. And I believe she did. I believe she saw that Shapiro was a candidate with flaws that would be exploited and that would be problematic. And that would not even necessarily be things that Republicans would have to pick on. It would be things that would, again, bring back what was threatening the Democratic ticket all along when Biden was at the top of it, which is that disillusionment among Democratic voters, especially young voters, and obviously also Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, who I think, for the most part, are still taking and correctly taking a wait and see attitude. But let's talk a little bit about the Harris-Walz ticket, what it is and what it isn't, and particularly in terms of Israel-Palestine. So as I said, Tim Walz is certainly pro-Israel. He has long supported military aid to Israel. He supports a two-state solution. He's basically held to the mainstream Democratic line on Israel. He forcefully condemned the attack on October 7th. He has also condemned the level of killing in Gaza. He has said this must end. He called for a ceasefire months ago. He talks about a ceasefire not in terms of stopping for a few weeks so that you can get hostages out and things like that. He talks about ending the current round of, well, I would call it genocide, but he will not, which is sort of the point. He has not called it a genocide. He has not accused Israel of war crimes, nothing like that, nothing remotely dealing with the reality of what has really happened in Gaza. But, he has called for it at least to stop. And I think that matters. Shapiro, I believe, has also backed the ceasefire, but more in the sense of sort of backing Biden's approach to it, which I think is sort of questionable. It makes it questionable whether or not he really backs a ceasefire, as we can see that Biden's approach is completely ineffective. Walz has also defended Palestine solidarity protesters. He has defended their right. He hasn't said he agrees with them at all, but he has defended their right to protest. But on the other hand, he's also bought into this false narrative that these protests against genocide, quote unquote, make Jewish students feel unsafe. This is the word to use. We do need, and at some point, I think I'd like to spend a little bit more time on it than I have right now, but we do need to unpack this concept and to deal with it, I think, also in a conscientious and fair manner, because the truth is that, yes, Jewish students on many of these campuses do feel unsafe. One of the things, and I can tell you, I was a Jewish student on campus in the late 90s at UC Berkeley, more recently as a graduate student at the University of Maryland. I saw anti-Semitism. I experienced it. I saw it. It was there. I think it's there now. I think, though, that the constant drumbeat within the Jewish community and within not just the Jewish community, but within the mainstream media, because it's been put there, this idea that criticism of Israel, calling out Israel for its war crimes, for its genocide, for its apartheid nature, is anti-Semitism. I think Jewish students very frequently feel that as anti-Semitism in a legitimate way. They're not trying to distort something. They're not trying to make things up out of thin air. That is really how they react. And here, that criticism and that reality, that truth, because for many Jews, and it's especially true, I think, for Orthodox Jews and for really secular Jews, whose Jewish identity in both of those cases can be very, very tightly wrapped up in Israel. It feels like a personal attack. So, again, this merits a lot more discussion, and I'm hoping to have a whole episode on this with at least one guest in a few weeks. Hopefully, it can make that happen. But what Walz is saying is fine as far as the empathy goes, but it's not anti-Semitism. It is being upset because you can't stand hearing Israel being criticized, and you take that as anti-Semitism. That's not fair. That's not, and this is especially not fair to people who are protesting genocide, who are protesting war crimes. And if you don't want to use those words, you don't want to say apartheid, fine, it's discrimination. It's mass murder. It is, the official count in Gaza of the dead is 40,000, but we know it's much more than that. We know that. Whether it's because of so many people who are buried under rubble, because so many bodies just lying around unidentified, because of or if we want to start talking about what malnutrition and disease and lack of water and lack of sanitary facilities, et cetera, the destruction of the healthcare infrastructure. This has been an enormous thing. And yes, we can empathize. I can empathize at least with Jewish students who feel viscerally and truly attacked and personally scared when they hear Israel being called out on these things. Fact is, though, people need to call them out, or otherwise it's going to continue. It is kind of on the responsibility of the Jewish community to stop giving these students the message that that these things are anti-Semitic. They have to be able to, this is college. No one said that, everything you hear and every idea you're confronted with on college makes you feel good or makes you, fulfilled. Sometimes it makes you angry. Sometimes it makes you nervous. You have to learn how to deal with that. And you also have to learn how to deal with reality. And when people are calling Israel out on the reality of what it's doing, I'm sorry if it makes you uncomfortable, but you have to find a way to address it and deal with it. And instead of responding in that visceral way, why don't you go and find out whether or not it's true? Okay, so back to Walz. He has made that statement, and that's a bit problematic. But again, at least he's doing it in a way of trying to be empathetic to people who could use a little bit of empathy, and he hasn't ignored the protesters themselves, and he has not failed to defend their right to protest, and he has not delegitimize them in doing so. He said, talks about Jewish students being made to feel unsafe, but he hasn't accused those people of going on anti-Semitic rampages or trying to make Jewish students feel unsafe. So he's been, I'm not going to say fair, but he's been better than a lot of people, certainly better than Shapiro. Historically, Walz opposed the Iraq War when he was in Congress. He supported the Iran nuclear deal, which, I have to say, people forget now. This was a big deal. And again, this is something I'd like to spend some more time on soon, because we've already forgotten. This was a real foreign policy step forward that is very, very rare in U.S. History. And it's unfortunate that Donald Trump, just destroyed it with the wave of his hand. But it wasn't easy for Democrats to support Obama on this. This wasn't just about saying, yes, he's our president, we're going to, support his foreign policy. It was hard for Democrats. There was a lot of pressure on Democrats, mostly in the Senate, it's true, and Walz was in the House. But still, there was a lot of pressure on Democrats not to support the nuclear deal. Walz did. That's important. It shows me that he understands how important that particular foreign policy agenda was. And I would say in general, his foreign policy has been reasonable, has not been, again, not revolutionary, not radical, but it has been reasonable and reflects, I think, a general desire to place diplomacy over military action. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a very, very good thing. And I think we need a lot more of that. Very much in the Democratic Party. We need a great deal more of that. One of the key things, though, about Walz is that he's shown that he can be moved on the issues. This guy once had an A rating from the NRA. Now he has an F because he learned more about the issue. He recognized he was a gun owner himself. He is a veteran, so it's not like he's one of these people who knows how to handle guns if he wants to. But he understood the dangers of them. And so now, again, he's not radical. He's for what everybody refers to as common sense gun laws. And we'll get to some of the specifics in a minute. But that's, that the fact that he moved on this issue, and on a key issue, and on one where you have to, defy a very, very powerful lobby to move on this, that's a big deal. That shows us, I think, something about who Tim Walz is, and gives me at least a little hope that more progress can be made on Palestinian rights, by convincing him, and by extension, therefore, hopefully President Harris. Um, you know, and Walz has done this despite some political pressures. When he was in Congress, the district that he represented leans Republican. He unseated a two-term Republican to get that seat. It's not an overwhelmingly red district, but it does lean Republican, and he managed to stay in Congress for, I think, 4 elections. So, and then you get to his record as governor, and he managed to do a lot of good things, despite having a split legislature. So I think that, again, that shows that he knows how to talk to people from different sides. So what did he get done as governor? Well, thanks to Secular Talk's Kyle Kulinski, who sent out a couple of tweets that listed the things that Walz has gotten done as governor. Remember, he's been governor since 2019. Again, some of the time that he was governor, he only had a 1-seat majority in the state legislature. So here's a partial list of the things he's done. He did universal free school meals, legalized cannabis. He put Minnesota on track for carbon-free electricity by 2040. We'll see if that ends up coming about, but that's the plan he installed. He instituted tax rebates for the working class, people making under $150,000 per year, up to $1,300 of tax rebates. 12 weeks paid family leave, 12 weeks paid sick leave. He banned conversion therapy. And I think, those of us who care about trans issues and LGBT issues in general need to look at this, because this is also one of the, I'm no big fan of Kamala Harris, and there's a lot that worries me about her record. But one thing she has been actually very strong on is trans rights. And, here we see Walz gets it too. So I think that's a big plus in my mind. Your mileage may vary depending on where the issue of trans rights lands for you in terms of your priorities. For me, it's a big one. And I think that, we're looking at a very promising future on that one issue with Harris and Walz in the White House. He instituted red flag laws for guns, universal background checks for guns, automatic voter registration, free public college for people making under $80,000 a year, ban on PFAS, the forever chemicals that you've probably heard about. He increased K-12 school funding by $2.2 billion. He instituted sectoral bargaining for home care workers. He opposed the Wall Street bailouts in 2008. This is when he was in Congress, of course. Voted against outsourcing deals. He has a 100% rating from Planned Parenthood. And again, that's a pretty big issue right now. I think we can all agree on that, and trying to undo the massive damage that the Supreme Court has done. He banned non-compete clauses, which, again, I mean, when you talk about workers' rights, that is a huge deal. And he was out in front of that. This was something Bernie Sanders had to really push hard on Joe Biden to even bring up on the national level, and he just did it in Minnesota. He raised the Minnesota minimum wage for small businesses, raised taxes on multinational corporations, and that's, again, big distinction between him and Shapiro, who wants to cut those taxes. He protected gender-affirming care, here's the trans rights again. He banned medical providers from withholding care over debt, protected construction workers from wage theft, and he instituted a massive Minnesota infrastructure bill. And there's more. He's done a lot of good, and it has not been politically easy. It's not like he's just been, he's had all of the cards stacked in his favor. Minnesota is a fraught state as far as, doing things on a bipartisan basis. So, that is not easy. Now, I've spent a lot of time talking about his accomplishments. I have a lot of respect for Tim Walz as a politician. But everything I read off to you just now, they're good. I think they're positive things. They have nothing to do with systemic change, right? They have to do with the basic liberal approach of sort of fixing things on the margins without threatening the system itself. And that's who Walz is. That's very much, that puts him, I think, a little bit to the left of Harris. But as my friend Mark Lamont Hill put it, both of these people, they are liberals. They are not progressives. They are certainly not radicals. They are going to fix things on the margins at best if we can push them for it. But that being said, they are at least moving in that direction as opposed to some of the things we've seen from others. Walz is I think well ahead of Harris on that, so that's why I'm happy that she chose him, and I think it shows some good judgment on her part because she recognized that that was where she needed the help, as opposed to everybody telling her, "Oh no, go get that centrist who will get you these, never Trump Republicans." Those people are going to vote for Harris anyway. The question is whether or not the youth are going to vote at all. The ones who have real stake in a lot of the issues I was just discussing. So, again, very, very happy that Walz was picked. All of that being said, Walz is going to be the vice president. And he is, as I said, to the left of Harris. I would argue he's probably well to the left of Harris. And even probably, on Palestine, I feel like the two of them are kind of lined up. They're very, very close. But ultimately, the vice president works for the president, right? Harris worked for Biden. Biden worked for Obama. Again, I mentioned the Iran nuclear deal. This was Obama's signature accomplishment. Biden did nothing to save it when he got into office. Trump destroyed it. Biden did nothing to bring it back. He dragged his feet until there was a conservative administration in Iran that was never going to do what was necessary to bring that deal back. He started talking about how he was going to look for improvements here, quote unquote improvements, more concessions from Iran. So it was, it was clear that Biden did not have the same appreciation, understanding, or desire to bring that deal back that Obama had to institute it. And that, again, shows the difference between the president and the vice president. They're in the room. Tim Walz's voice will matter in the sense that he will give Kamala Harris advice if she's elected. He will be one voice among many with whoever the Secretary of State is, Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, and the whole, all the other advisors, some of whom won't even be in office. I mean, we certainly know that former presidents are involved in these discussions, and you talk to all sorts of people when you're trying to make policy. So, and the vice president will be one, but it'll just be one voice. So, I think part of this is a lot of, and I've spent a lot of time talking about it, but part of this is much ado about nothing, because in the end, it's the president. I mean, I don't know anyone who's ever voted for a vice president. I try to think, people vote for presidents despite their vice president. I knew people who voted for John McCain despite Sarah Palin. I knew people, certainly knew back in the day, a lot of people who voted for George H.W. Bush despite Dan Quayle. Never met anyone who voted for Bush, Quayle because of Quayle. Never met anyone who voted for Obama, Biden because of Biden. I think, again, Biden was picked to mollify some people that may have been concerned about the so-called radical liberal first Black president. But Biden, again, who voted for Obama because of Biden? Who? When Obama's 2 terms were done, Biden didn't even run. Wasn't the next nominee. Nobody really expected him to be. He wasn't very good at that sort of thing. So, it ultimately it's not a big deal as far as policy, but I do think it shows us, as I mentioned, some good things about Harris's judgment, about her self-awareness, because I think there was a lot of pressure to pick Shapiro because he was the safe choice, the conservative choice, the pro-Israel choice. And Harris recognized that was not what she needed, because she has that. What she needed was help among people who are still very, very skeptical of her, which is the youth, the Arab American, Muslim American, and progressive constituents who had so much abandoned Joe Biden that he had to step aside in what was a historic shift in the middle of a presidential election. So, I do think it's on that level, it's a good thing. And it shows me something about Harris that made me feel like, maybe there's stuff that those of us who advocate in Washington can actually work with in her administration. Even those of us who advocate for Palestinian rights, we have been as shut out from Biden, I think, on many levels as we were by Trump. The only difference is that Biden at some point knew he needed to at least try and deal with some of these votes, and he was unable to do so. Trump and any Republican knows it doesn't matter, what Palestine advocates say, because none of us are going to vote for him anyway, so he doesn't care. So there is, I think, a sense for me that this shows that there may be some ways of working with the Harris administration to improve what might be, I hope she will be an improvement. I think she will be an improvement over Biden. I mean, it's a very low bar on Palestine. And I think there may be even more to do, more potential to get her to be even better. But what I think is maybe most important for us all to take away from this is that this is really the first time ever that Palestine advocacy has really been a force in a primary election. We have made a difference. Biden did not step aside just because of Palestine. He did not step aside just because of Gaza, but that was a factor. And it was not an insignificant factor. It wasn't a tiny drop in an ocean. It was a significant factor. I believe that Palestine was also a significant factor in why Harris decided not to pick Josh Shapiro. Has nothing to do with Shapiro being Jewish. Okay, had this been John Fetterman, believe me, it would have been the same, and the considerations, by the way, would have been the same as well. Exactly alike. It has nothing to do, and people making that accusation, I think, for the most part, are acting in bad faith, or they're just stupid. Either way, it's nonsense. But we need to recognize that this is historic. It may feel like not much. It may feel like too little, especially in light of what's happening in Gaza, and in light of the increasing terror that we all feel at a regional conflict in the Middle East, and the escalating ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, and the tightening of the apartheid system all across Palestine. It may feel like it's just not enough, and it's not enough, obviously, but this is how it begins. This is how we build. We have a base to build on now. We have never had this before. Believe me, I have been at this work since the 1990s. We have never had this before, ever. Nothing close to this. We have had a real impact on this presidential race, and certainly on the Democratic primary, and it matters. The world has not changed yet, but we have that base to build on, and we must build on it. We cannot allow ourselves to say it's not enough. We can realistically understand it's not enough, because it isn't. But we cannot allow ourselves to despair because it's not enough, because this is the only way we're ever going to change this horrific U.S. policy that is the entire reason that Israel can do what it does. So with that, I'm going to leave you to think about that. Please share this video, like and subscribe. Again, mitchellplotnick.substack.com, or just look up the Cutting Through newsletter on Substack, and you can subscribe there. Please support this work. Thanks so much for watching this video, and we'll be back soon.